Welcome back to Ceasefire Podcast. My name is Andrew. I'm joined by Lucas. Episode 17 was the Asbury Revival. Real, thanks for joining us today. If you haven't, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and also like the episode. And if you love this content, please tune in for part 2 of the episode, during which we will be going a lot deeper and a lot more personal on the topic as we do each and every episode. And finally, if you're interested in being a co-producer or executive producer of the podcast, join us on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/ceasefire podcast. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We are about to delve into some very interesting material today, Lucas, and I've been excited about this one ever since we discussed this, going back to the inception of this quote-unquote event, and that is the, again, quote-unquote, Asbury Revival that took place recently at Asbury University. Is it a university? I should know this. In Wilmore, Kentucky.
Yeah. It's in Wilmore. Everybody just keeps referring to the place as Asbury. It is Asbury University. Yes.
Yeah. So this.
The dates were, it spontaneously started February the 8th, and they ended revival services on the 23rd of February, so that's how long it ran.
Yeah, it started spontaneously. It was ended not spontaneously by the administration at the college after 2 weeks of global press coverage. Huge deal.
Yeah.
And we're in a unique time in history, whereas other phenomena of this nature in decades and years past were reliant upon word of mouth in a given region because we live in the era of social media and the internet. This thing caught on like wildfire, and people were coming to Asbury from all over the world, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. And there were some pretty unique elements to this phenomenon, to this event that we'll talk a little bit about in this segment. And we're going to do our very best again to save our deeper personal connection and reactions to the next segment. So we want to give an overview and kind of talk about the facts of the event, give our initial reactions when we first heard about it, and then we're going to move on from there. So Lucas, the first thing I wanted to throw out to you is, where were you, or how early on in this becoming national, international news did it come to your attention? And, what was your kind of gut level response to it?
The first thing I saw was the hashtag trending, and then I saw some videos on Twitter. And I just kind of ignored it because my instinct was, oh, there's something happening and they're trying to promote it. That was my initial thought. Like, oh, they're promoting some cool thing that's happening. It wasn't like a dismissive form of skepticism. It was more like, oh, I see this all the time. You're having an event, you're having a conference, and you use hashtags. Then I saw articles and I saw tweets about people defending the realness of it, or, questioning the authenticity of it. And I think initially I thought, I'm not going to call into question whether or not it's real if I'm not there. And certainly, according to my own belief system, these types of things can happen. But I did think, some good inquiry would be in order, because in this day and age, the virality of the internet, something can take off that's been completely manipulated or completely orchestrated and faked. You remember when flash mobs were a thing? People would go to an area and suddenly start doing something and record it. So I don't think I had any deep-seated dismissal or skepticism. I think I initially kind of had a pretty balanced view of, this could be real and genuine, and these sorts of situations should be treated with care, and again, just careful inquiry into the people that went, how was it handled. And so my initial reaction after seeing like, oh, this isn't some event they're trying to promote, there's actually something happening and people are going there for the event, I remember thinking we should not be quick to dismiss this, because I know that is the instinct of the day, I think, is to dismiss things as not real. Reality TV's rarely ever real. Everything, the world feels like a stage at this point. So I think the the global digitized nature of how we interact on social media makes us almost a skeptic of anything, even if it's not spiritual or mystical. I think we're just naturally skeptical on the authenticity of things happening.
I think there are some very good, healthy skepticism in there, but also not dismissal. And I would say my reaction was a little bit different than yours initially. I kind of had this parallel reaction where my deep gut, and I'll get into this more in the next segment, is whenever I hear the word revival, I immediately dismiss it.
Okay.
Because I went to an Assemblies of God college, not having been raised Assemblies of God, and that word was used very often. And you got kind of numb to it.
Right.
It was either referring to events as revivals or trying to intentionally spark up the concept of revival on our campus. So I was exposed to a lot of different things back then, again, that I'll get into a little bit deeper in the next segment. But my first response was just almost like an eye roll. I hate to say that because it sounds like I'm dismissive and bitter, but that was my gut. But there's another side to it. While, I think that term has been overused in certain circles, I took a step back from my initial emotional response, and I thought about, well, wait a second. Could I think of anything that our country probably needs more than something like this, especially among younger generations, college age people, students? Because the social and political and spiritual battle is very real for the soul of our country right now. And so just after stepping back and sort of removing my own history with this concept and word, I'm like, wow, I would love to hear more about this, because obviously there's going to be a lot of conjecture and a lot of talk. Whenever something like this occurs, it's very divisive. So it really prodded me to want to look into it deeper, which us covering this for this episode was the extra boost I needed to take that process even further. Sure. So I would say I was probably, on one hand more dismissive than you, and on the other hand, like also simultaneously kind of almost excited about it because of the current context with which our world and our country is in. So I was kind of wrestling with those two polarizing views within myself for quite a while here.
Yeah, I saw Christians responding on Facebook in a way that I was discouraged by. There was a sort of a meme circling. There's memes within Christendom. There's within the church.
Right.
I can't stand it, but it's there. And they said it was essentially this. Let me paraphrase. It was something like, thinking about revival or wanting to find revival, this happens every Sunday in this building. They were basically poking fun at the idea of, you don't need to go to Asbury. You don't need to propagate or try to have revival. Come to church every Sunday. We do it every Sunday. And I saw in that layers of problems, just layers of problems. First, it felt motivated by jealousy. It's almost as if this campus, this movement is happening. They're having this viral moment of intrigue, and it's popular and everyone's going. And you're kind of miffed or annoyed because maybe your church attendance is down, or maybe you're not as successful as a preacher. And these were younger pastors, they put their sermons on Facebook and stuff. And I didn't appreciate it. I thought, man, just of all of the people to be instinctively critical and cynical about this, why would you be the ones to act in this way? Because if you're gathering as a Christian church, you're gathering around a pretty mystical faith. So to instinctively act as if this is silly or frivolous, or people should just come to church, it just smacks of the old school legalistic, moralistic days of like, well, yeah, if you would come to church every week and if you were reading your Bible, you'd be having revival. And it was like, okay. Like, it just kind of smacked of self-righteousness and being overly pharisaical about it. And I appreciated an older gentleman who used to be at our church and he had moved away. He kind of called it out and said, this should be our last response, as if to, make fun of this or mock this. Like, what if somebody goes and is interested and something profound happens to them, and then they're going to come to your church when they come back home, right? Like, you don't want them darkening the doors of your church with this feeling of like they went and did something shameful or wrong. So I thought some of the Christian reactions were more discouraging. I expect the culture at large in America to look at this as if it's like a circus. I expect that, but I kind of didn't expect it or didn't want to see it from Christians.
Yeah, part of that is the clickbait nature of our world, and I brought this up before we started recording. We always have these, I guess pre-production meetings before we start the episode, and
yeah.
One of us always starts the episode while we're doing that, and the other has to be like, okay, let's save that for the episode. But the thing that I mentioned, and I think is relevant, is there are entire segments of the Christian church or organizations that are, I would put in the heresy hunter category.
Yeah.
And they derive their traffic and their entire base from going around and pointing out what's wrong with everybody's, thing,
right.
Their church, their denomination, their revival, whatever, their book, pick the thing. So, and then you add to that, the clickbait nature and the grandstanding nature, something happens in the world and you see, millions of people posting content relative to that thing, positive and negative, reacting to it. Reaction content is very popular right now. So you've got a lot of that going on. It's hard to sift through the noise and sort of get to the bottom of what's actually going on. But a couple of interesting facts or notes about this specific event that took place that I found illuminating and very interesting were the fact that they were anti-production, anti-celebrity,
yes,
and pretty anti-social media in general. Like people were obviously, posting their own viral videos that they shot, but the actual school and the people who were affiliated with sort of, hosting the event, they turned down Tucker Carlson, and they didn't want any Christian celebrities there jumping up on stage.
Yeah.
They didn't want anyone being able to claim it as their own or as their endorsement. There was they weren't even using production. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't a band jamming through the loudspeakers. It was really, really just organic, like almost like a house Bible study kind of feel to it. And they were very careful to sort of, not distract from just the idea that people are there to try to connect with God and connect with Jesus and, everything that is entailed inside of that. So I found that interesting because if it was the opposite, it probably would have been a lot easier to dissect and write off.
Yes.
And if there is a genuine sort of revival that were to happen, I would assume it would lean closer to those characteristics, more humble characteristics, rather than, turning it into like a big media event type of thing, which it became anyways. But they were really attempting to curb that, which I thought was good and illuminating. I don't know if you were aware of any of that.
Well, you sent those articles. I liked reading that. When I saw that they turned away Christian celebrities and, people that were trying to take advantage of it, I thought that's exactly the right response, because I'm kind of tired of that. I don't like the Christian celebrity. I don't like the Christian Twitterverse or Tucker Carlsons of the world. Like, they feel like vultures to me. And I don't say that to insult. I say that as a warning. Like, these are wolves. These are not people that I would say are to be trusted in this realm. Like, if you want to talk about news media and all that, I don't feel like having that debate with somebody in the realm of faith, in the realm of religion and Christianity and mystical things, I am very leery of people who are always sort of taking advantage of whatever's happening to turn a buck or to sell their book or to clickbait. And obviously there's a tension there because I believe there are good-meaning people out there. I think you and I have good intentions. We're in this space. We're creating content. But I also am glad we didn't jump on this. It's over now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the virality of it's done. We're not being opportunistic. We're saying, listen, this thing happened, and in the wake of it, what do we make of what happened? Let's do a bit of an autopsy of the situation. Let's kind of debrief on it. And I think that that's what people should be looking for. If you're looking for not necessarily an authentic revival, or maybe just authentic persons or organizations, religions, even sources of information, I would use that as a pretty good litmus test. When I read that they were doing that and turning people away, I said, that already is making me think something authentic was happening. Something genuine was taking place, and they were being protective of it rather than using it as an opportunity. Because they easily could have. It's so tempting when something like this happens to turn the camera on and get the clicks. Because we see this happening with when people get in fights in the public. Instead of somebody stepping in and helping and being a good Samaritan, everybody's thinking, oh, I'm gonna get a video and it's gonna go viral. And I'm not against anybody who went posting videos, but I am glad to know that was so not the focal point. And I think that might have been why my initial touchstone with it was like, what is going on? Because it was people sort of tweeting about it, people who had been there. It wasn't this organized market push, this press thing. And more, I think that's going to be a challenge for people of faith who enter into these spheres and want your message to be out there, but you also, that means you're leveraging these platforms and stuff, but you also want to be authentic and you want to have real connections. My church is making the decision to no longer live stream the Sunday morning service because they really want to push people to come and gather. And it was a great solution in 2020 when you couldn't. And there were lots of people that needed to stay home because, maybe they've recently had surgeries or whatever, and they just needed to be extra careful. So we were offering that. But now they want to stop. They don't want that to be sort of this replacement. And I've been putting pressure on them to start creating content. I'm like, I want to build a studio. I want to be creating like interviews, roundtables, discussions. I want to feed the flock good content. And my primary concern was, we're not trying to become Christian famous. Like, I want to feed the flock here with the content. And I think that that's something people need to consider when approaching a church or a movement or an event like this. Those are a good litmus test of authenticity, I think.
And the most obvious criticism of something like this is it's emotionalism, right? People are seeking an experience. And you can conjure up an emotional experience with a bunch of people getting together and getting fired up about anything.
Yep.
Really. You could call, a protest, a spiritual experience or for certain folks, getting together in an urban center and destroying and looting, and that could be a spiritual experience. The revolution of the proletariat striking back against the evil man. So that's what human beings are. We're emotional beings, and when we get together, our emotions feed off of one another and produce greater emotions. And I've certainly experienced that in my journeys through the church and Christian culture and such. And that's where my mind automatically goes. The contrast to that, or the question to ask, and really the reason why we titled the episode "Was This Real?" Is that there is always the possibility that it is, especially if you are a believer in the things that we believe in. So we have to leave room for that, and we have to test it, so to speak. And I think ultimately the way to answer that question, which we can't in this episode, obviously, it's just a discussion topic, is to see, does it produce something lasting in the lives of the people who were connected to it? Is there an actual life change that occurs? Do
Yeah.
people change the way they're living? Not just get fired up like going to a Christian camp when you're a kid,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or any camp when you're a kid. You get to the mountaintop,
Yeah.
metaphorically, and you have this amazing experience for a weekend, and then you come back down and your life isn't any different. We've all experienced things like that. And
Mm.
unfortunately, that is the norm, not the exception. The exception is something authentic. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I'm looking forward to wrestling with in a deeper sense in the next segment, for sure. Do you have any sort of tie a bow around it thoughts for this segment?
Yeah, I think there's two things I want to say. Number one, it's not really up to us to determine whether or not it was real, because that something happened, okay? Something took place. Trying to dissect the realness of it or the fakeness of it, I just don't think that's what our job is in this situation. It would be to lean in and not be the cynics and the skeptics, because if anybody did go and they feel like something happened and now they are of interest of the faith, or maybe they feel they are now a part of the faith, the last thing we want to do is say like, okay, prove it. Like, prove
Yeah.
it. But I think
Yeah.
there is a healthy amount of, hey, there should be fruit from this if it was genuine. And these are sort of the ways to foster that fruit and to practice your faith, like get involved in a church, start to meet other people, and to dig down, have somebody maybe even try to teach you, maybe mentor you, disciple you, something like that. I think there's a fine line between being like, okay, prove it was real, and being like, well, there should be fruit. But we also don't want to put up those walls and barriers, because if you're speaking cynically or critically of the event, you may really be stigmatizing somebody who went and actually had an experience. I think it'd be better to be, as we've tried to model on this show, be conversational about it and ask, what was it like? Where do you think you stand now? What do you think you should be doing in response? Like, I think just open that dialogue, give people space to have an experience like this and let it affect their life, and celebrate it if it does. Because I think sometimes in the Christian world, Christian circles can be almost jealous or experience a level of, you're coveting what they got to have happen. And recently in a sermon at our church, our pastor shared a guy left to go on mission, and while he was gone, the interim pastor, there was like this big, huge movement that took place under his preaching. The church was growing, and there was like a revival kind of a thing happening. They didn't call it that, but the guy that went away celebrated that. It was like, oh, my people are being cared for. But it'd be really easy to be jealous. Like, this guy's taking victory.
Or fall back on the politics of it.
Exactly. So
which is, again, the norm usually.
Right. Don't let Western culture infect this with skepticism, cynicism, or sort of a crossed-armed will prove something happened. So that'd be my final thoughts before we dive a little deeper into what is our view of revival, what is our view of the mystical, right? And what does Christianity look like even outside of America with mystical happenings? That'll kind of be the part two, to dive a little deeper. And what we believe, this is more flyover cautionary, like, hey, something happened. And I think there's been good and bad responses from the outside.
Yeah, and again, coming back to my sort of, schizophrenic response to it, I'm more apt to dismiss my skepticisms in favor of, our country needs some stuff like this to happen, especially among younger people. Forget whether or not it's the form or the obvious criticisms of whether we're talking emotionalism or mysticism or whatever. Just the fact that there's a ton of young people getting together that are affecting the larger culture to take a harder look at themselves spiritually and the way that they relate to God, I don't see that as being a negative thing in the time in which we live right now. But we'll get into the deeper aspects of that in the next segment. Part 2 of the episode was the Asbury Revival Reel. Again, if you're joining us for the first time, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button at the bottom of the window, and also the like button. And if you want to hear more, join us in part 2 of the episode coming up right now.